So welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this chapter knowledge series on consent agendas. We have Cheryl Murphy with the Illinois chapter with us today and Kate Combs with the Arizona chapter. Today we are reviewing what a consent agenda is and how these chapters are utilizing them. At any time you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and we will try to answer the questions that are related to the topic at that time or at the very end. We are doing this in more of a casual format today, where I will be asking questions that are related to this topic, and Cheryl and Kate will be answering those questions. We do have a couple of items that we will be adding into the chat for handouts with more information about consent agendas, with, again, details of what can be included in them, kind of how to process and order them. But this is more to get that understanding of how you could utilize this with your chapter. So again, thank you all for being here today. We really enjoy these types of sessions, and we are recording this as well. And we will get that posted up on our chapter leader YouTube page so that you can share this out if you'd like to share it with anyone who's not here today. So with that, what is a consent agenda? You might also hear the word consent calendar. Robert's Rules of Order references this as a consent calendar. They're interchangeable. They're the exact same thing when you hear those two terms. Really what we're doing is you're taking, within your board meeting, you're taking a group of routine business and grouping it into one action item so that that can be approved and taken off of the regular agenda of, instead of approving 5 different line items, you are approving it as one group. Again, we will get into, if you want to remove anything from that, how you do that. But really, this is just a way to get those items approved within your board meetings, so that you can move on to other discussion points and not take up as much time. So with that, Cheryl and Kate, again, thank you for being with us today and sharing how you use this. Why did you decide to move to this format with your chapters?
Oh, you want to go?
We're both being so polite.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
So we went to this 10 years ago when the chapter revamped it, how its governance process. And that's how we got started. We were looking for a way to be more efficient and effective during our board meetings instead of getting sidetracked. And so it's worked well, and we've kept it going ever since with some recent modifications.
And we've been using it for about a year. And our goal was also to be more efficient, but really it was to open up the board meeting to allow the board members to be more strategic in their discussions. So rather than, our board meetings are 2 hours, rather than take an hour and a half of that to be in routine business, and then it felt like we were rushing through our strategic discussions, it grouped all of that together, and then allowed for much more time to talk strategy, and it helped the board members engage more because they didn't feel like they were just coming to the meeting to rubber stamp decisions that didn't really, not that they don't matter, but that they don't require a lot of conversation.
What kind of content do you put within that grouping of items?
So we do, ours always includes, I've got it up, so I'm looking. It includes our minutes from the previous meeting. It includes the agenda from the current meeting. We added in the acceptance of the director's report into the consent agenda. We hadn't been acknowledging really the director's report in the board meeting agenda approval process prior to that. And then any contracts, so like last month, we had a food and beverage contract. We had an AV contract for our conference and expo. If we ever have like the approval of a new committee chair or something along those lines, those all go in the consent agenda because they don't generally require conversation. If it's a contract that's something new, where maybe the concept is unusual, or it's a contract where the board really does want to kind of understand the terms of that, or we need the attorney to weigh in on it, then that would not be part of the consent. But these are repeat contracts from companies that we've done business with before.
And our agenda is a little different. We have, the consent agenda concept. We have the minutes from the previous meetings, depending on when we last met, minutes of open or executive session. We have the executive summary. We have my monitoring reports. Those are, based on our policies. And then we also have the financials in there. And then if there's something they have questions on, they would pull it out and put it in the new business.
So speaking to that, how would you go about pulling out an item, or what's the process for that to take place?
Well, for us, so the financials are in the consent agenda because, like, for example, they get the board packet ahead of time. So if they had a quick question, they could pull out and ask a question, but mostly it would be for my monitoring reports. They're very detailed. They could be up to 20 pages long. And if, like, for example, the agenda we have for a board meeting tomorrow, there's 4 of them in there. So there's about 50 pages of material I gave them to read. And so what they would do is they would pull out something specific they want to discuss, and maybe not necessarily consent on the entire package, but they would put it down in the president would say, does anybody have any questions? A board member could say, oh, I have a question about XYZ on XYZ report, and they would put it down in new business. And when they got to that line item, they could have a discussion on it. And that way it doesn't slow down the voting process of the consent agenda.
Great. Thank
And for
Erica.
us, yeah, we haven't really had that situation where we needed to pull anything out, but we have a process where I'll do a draft report or a draft agenda and send it to our executive board. And we have a quick call a week before the regular board meeting. That's maybe 15-20 minutes to just sort of review the agenda and make sure that the executive board knows what we're talking about at the meeting. And there have been 1 or 2 occasions where there was something in the consent agenda, or there was a question, should it be in consent or should it be in the regular decisions required section? So for us, that's where we would pull that out.
Great, thank you. And just to let everybody know, in the chat, I did drop in board agendas for both Illinois and Arizona to give you examples of how they organize their agendas for their board meeting. But speaking to that, you both referenced, some of these can be many pages that they need to review ahead of time. How early do you send out your board packets for them to be able to review this information?
Cheryl.
So as I mentioned, I do a quick draft and send it to the executive board. What would be like a week and a half before the actual board meeting. We do that quick call, but the full board packet goes to the whole board on a Thursday, and then their board meeting is on the Tuesday. They want the weekend to be able to review it. And ours too, like our that packet could be anywhere from 50 to 80 pages, depending on what's in it.
This one, because there were so many monitoring reports, my average time is, so if it's on a Friday, I'll send it the Friday before. If it's on a Tuesday, I'll send it the Tuesday before. So a good week for them ahead of time. And because of our structure, we don't have an executive team. It's just the board. And so, like, contracts and like what Cheryl said, for us is a little different. Certain things aren't in there, but in that week, we encourage the board, if they have any questions about the financials, something easy that I can answer, to answer ahead of time, just to reduce redundance in the board meeting when it's something little. And then sometimes they, like, because of that week, they're prepared and they come with questions, or they may want to wait. And the president's involved. They can contact them, the president or myself, if they have questions prior. Or they just say, I'm going to have a question at the meeting. I'd like everybody to hear my question.
Great. Cheryl, I know you just spoke to this a little bit with strategic discussions, but do you think by implementing this, your board's been more productive in your board meetings?
Yes, absolutely. For years, we've had a strategic discussion section of our agenda. But like I said, oftentimes by the time we got to that point, there had been so many weeds discussions for an hour and a half leading up to it, the people were drained. We didn't give it the time that it needed. So now we have a good lengthy amount of time to spend on the strategic discussions. And where we used to have maybe one bullet point in the strategic discussion area, we now sometimes have two, maybe even three. Like we can touch on a few different areas and make more progress in those areas. So 100% it's been they're way more productive on that, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to pick the napkin color. They're supposed to, decide how do we increase membership, or how do we do the strategy for that. And they've been able to have those discussions much more readily available.
Kate, same thing to you. Do you feel like you've been more productive during your board meetings?
Yes, we've been more productive. We were definitely, prior to this 10 years ago, board meetings could, like Cheryl, could go 2 to 3 hours. And by the time you got to something important, they were burnt out and just rubber stamped it or tabled it, which prevented us, as staff, moving forward with any projects. And now that that's changed, they do strategic planning quarterly outside of the board meetings. The board meetings are just for FYI on what the chapter is up to at that point, and for their engagement and their analyzing of their policies. If there's a time where they think, like on this one that you posted for everybody to look at, there's not too much on there about policy, but the next board meeting there probably will be, because they meet every other month. So the whole idea is, because they don't meet but four to 6 times a year, they do a lot of strategic planning outside. And the whole idea is, when you get to the board meeting, is okay, let's talk about what is important for the board to know right now and to decide upon. And the goal is to reduce from 2 to 3 hour meetings down to an hour. Was our goal. Because we do so much stuff behind the scenes, there's no reason to have a board meeting beyond that, because there's so much internal checks and balances with our policies.
Have either of you had any issues with having this type of format for your board meetings? No. Okay.
No, not really, no.
Okay. When you either started this process, or when you get a new board member onto your board, what type of information do you provide them about this process, specifically if this is the first time they're seeing a consent agenda?
So we just went through this because we implemented it last year after the board was, the new board. And then we just now had a few new people, and it sort of like was a little bit of a pan to the face because we didn't really think about the fact that this is a new concept, and we were going through the agenda, and just then in the moment took a stop and explained, why it is this way. And it was, both of the people, like, they definitely understood the process and why we would do it that way, and they were completely on board. But we will now build that into our board orientation. For us, we normally do the board orientation on the first meeting, but due to several reasons, we're doing it in the second meeting. So that was a little bit part of it as well, but it will be part of the orientation to explain what that is and why we're grouping those things together and not really talking about them.
When the slate is approved, we send them the bylaws, the policy manual, and then a couple samples of some minutes and samples of the agenda, and explain to them, I explain to them what the consent agenda is and what they'll be looking at when they get a board pack, because a lot of them also aren't used to the monitoring reports. That throws them just as much as the consent agenda. So I just explained to them briefly, this is what they're going to see. And we highly encourage them to make sure they use the week to be prepared. Part of the reason of the reduction to an hour was to know that they come prepared. So that's hit home quite a bit. And even currently, to please be prepared when you come to a board meeting.
So if any of the chapters want to start this process, what do you recommend they should do?
I would say first to just have the conversation with the board. Like, our president at the time, she had, come across this process, thought it was a good idea, talked about it with our executive team, talked about it with me, presented it the idea at a board meeting, and I can't recall if they actually voted on that idea or not. But then by the next meeting, we were just doing it. So I think that it would be important for the current board members to all be on board about it. Otherwise, you probably will start getting, it won't be as effective, right? Because if the people aren't in line with this concept, they're going to be asking questions about the consent agenda or trying to pull things out, and that's goes against the whole purpose of it.
We just had it at a board meeting when we switched to our governance structure. It made sense. They voted on it, so it was in the minutes, and they have been doing it ever since. But yeah, it definitely was a discussion, and they all agreed that they wanted to be more effective and efficient. So it's just worked. I mean, for 10 years, like I said, we've been doing it, and every new board that comes on says this is awesome and the fastest way and most productive way for the chapter to have a meeting, and that they were going to try to implement it back to where they came from if they were community managers or a CEO of a management company.
I think the important thing is that, when you have that discussion, if there is any resistance, it doesn't prevent discussion. It actually provides a bigger window to have better discussions. So if there's something that's in the consent agenda that somebody wants to talk about, it doesn't mean they can't. There is the opportunity to pull something out and have a discussion about it. But for 90%, 99% of the items in that consent agenda, they would have just been doing, okay, do I have a motion for a second? Okay, I'll pat. And then 20 minutes later, all you've done is make motions and pass or fail votes, and nothing really happens anyway. So, it's really a way to not prevent discussion, but to provide for space to have more productive discussions.
Great. So at this time, we'd like to open it up to the audience, all of you. Do any of you have any questions for either Cheryl, myself, or Kate about this process or how to use this within your chapters? And feel free to either come off mute or to put it in the chat.
I'd like to say I'm on the Illinois chapter board with Cheryl as our director, and it has, I think, in my opinion, using the consent agenda has been a huge time saver. And like Cheryl said, it still allows people to ask questions or open up the floor to discussion. If there's something contained in that agenda that they feel needs exploring, we definitely give it that time. But otherwise, it just really helps us to kind of move things along and focus on things that are maybe a little bit more pressing. So I just wanted to make a comment, not really a question.
Thank you, Kathy. If anyone else uses this for their board meetings, is there anything that you would also like to add to this discussion? I'll open that up as well. While you're thinking about it, I also dropped in a resource from the Core Strategies for Non-for-Profits in the chat as well. That's a great resource just about things. But I did get a message for a question. How do you approach any pushback from the boards when talking about this process? And I don't know that either of you really had any pushback.
We didn't.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't. And I guess I would just go back to what I had just said, that, it's not meant to be a silencer. It's meant to allow boards to be more strategic and have more thought-provoking conversations. So like, I would imagine the resistance would be that, well, wait, we're not talking about this stuff anymore. What do you mean you're just lumping it all together and like this stuff isn't important anymore? It's actually the opposite of that, right? Like we're trying to make the board meeting a more important space for strategic conversation. So thankfully we didn't have that pushback, but
we did originally because it was so new. And the board back then, I mean, because we're talking 2014, when we started this, they did at first, the current board members that were on it, because this was new to them and they had never done it. But once we started talking about, okay, this portion's in the consent agenda and this is why, and to be prepared for the meeting, what happened was a lot of our board members weren't prepared, I have to be honest, And as an employee working hard to put together a board packet with the president, doing all that work, and then they're not prepared and they're sitting there flipping through pages going, what, consent agenda? I mean, they voted for it, but then they weren't prepared. So the discussion was, okay, you like the idea, but you need to be prepared. So that was the pushback originally, was they liked it, then didn't come prepared. So then it is upon them to each other to make sure that they are prepared. So it was like self-check so that they're engaged as board members. And that's what I like about it as an employee. I'm engaged, I'm doing it. It's nice to see the board doing that as well. So it did help them become more engaged and tie until this day. And obviously we have a lot of turnover every year. You have different folks. It definitely increases their awareness and engagement in a board meeting than we didn't have before. So we have more productive discussions about issues.
Great, thank you. We do have, as I referenced earlier, several chapters that use this format for their board meetings. So if this is something that you're wanting to pursue within your own chapters, again, we have resources with other, again, your peers, whether you're a chapter executive director or a president or president-elect that you're wanting to start this process. Again, you've got your peers and we've got those forums between exchange and then also our monthly sharing calls to bring those up and to talk through that process, or again, any of the issues that you might be having, or again, how to get this started. So with that, if I'll wait another moment if anyone else has any questions, but we will also get, go ahead, Nancy.
I had sent you a message. I don't know if you saw it. I don't see homeowner agenda or homeowner forum on either of these agendas.
Yeah, so chapters, again, base their agendas and are working on different styles of projects. So specific areas might be different based on the chapter. So that might be something that's always on your board agenda, but that doesn't mean that it's on other chapter agendas specifically. Any other questions? All right, like I referenced, we will get this up onto our YouTube channel for you. So if you do want to share this with anybody else within your chapter leadership, please feel free to. Crystal also posted a link to our exchange. So again, just a reminder for both the CEDs, we have an exchange group, and then also for our president and president-elects, you are also a part of an exchange group so that you can communicate with your peers around things. But if you have any questions around this, please feel free to reach out to myself, Cheryl, or Kate, and we would be happy to discuss more about this with you. Thank you guys for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Cheryl, Kate, thank you so much for presenting and speaking to how your chapters use these. And again, good luck this year with everything that all of you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.